don't be too attached to the product because it's really all about the process.
Hello, and welcome to the Arts of Language podcast with Andrew Pudewa, founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or as many like to say, IEW. My name is Julie Walker, and I'm honored to serve Andrew and IEW as the Chief Marketing Officer. Our goal is to equip teachers and teaching parents with methods and materials which will aid them in training their students to become confident and competent communicators and thinkers. So, Andrew, it's about launching on to convention season, and you're about to go and speak to homeschoolers across the United States at conferences, about a dozen or so this year.
It's a busy season.
It's
a packed
busy
schedule, yes.
And what would you say are some of your most popular conference talks?
Well, certainly reaching the reluctant writer.
Yep.
You know, that's always been well attended.
Right. It's kind of the foundation for everything we do here at IEW,
Yeah,
so it's a
it
good
is.
one.
And just the title grabs people. Of course, you know, nurturing competent communicators,
Right.
talking about the importance of building the language patterns through reading out loud to kids and also through memorizing.
Right.
This year, I've actually taken one talk that I had, teaching boys and other kids who would rather be making forts all day, and I'm dividing it into two talks.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm always running out of time. The talks just keep growing, so I'm going to
I
have...
think every good teacher runs out of time. I think every teacher that's listening says, oh, Andrew Pudewa does that too?
Well, I don't know. Maybe the good teachers plan ahead better. But so I'm taking the stuff, you know, about how boys and girls see and hear and handle stress and pain and learn differently. I'm going to expand that. Part of what Dr. Sachs talked
Right.
with us about a while ago.
Yeah, and we had a podcast with him, which was fabulous.
Yeah, and then I'm going to take the second half of that talk and make it into a whole talk on principles of motivation.
Ah.
Another talk that seems to always have a significant effect in that people walk up to me afterwards and say, I really needed to hear that, is, of course, the 4 deadly errors of teaching writing.
Well, do you mind if we take some time to talk about that particular talk?
Well, we can't do all 4 in one podcast.
No. Okay. Well, we'll just see what happens and see how many podcasts it takes to talk about the 4 deadly errors. Now, you mentioned that people after the talk say, "Oh, that was so helpful." Do you think people will come to this talk because of the intriguing title,
Well,
or is it a little too pessimistic for them?
The original concept was much worse.
Okay.
When I first started writing this thing, I was going to call it the 7 deadly sins you could possibly commit when undertaking the teaching of writing to children.
Okay.
But number 1, that's way too long of a title. Number 2, 7 is just a little much to lay on people, and I don't like running out of time.
Right.
And then, of course, you know, it's not a moral thing. The 7 deadly sins, obviously an illusion. But I do kind of make a joke at the beginning and say, you know, the only way I could give this talk is to have committed all these errors myself.
So you use the word deadly because you needed an LY dress up?
No. I use it because it's an allusion to the 7 deadly sins.
Oh, got it.
But I do know that, you know, one of these or one or more of these errors, when repeated, can kill a child's interest in writing. It can kill a mom or a teacher's desire to keep teaching writing.
Right.
So there is a certain potential fatality,
Okay.
metaphorically, of course.
I see. Okay, good. Well, can we start with that one?
The first one,
Yeah.
I usually start with this, not because it is hierarchically the worst or least of them, but because it's the most common in our experience, and that would be overcorrecting.
Overcorrecting. Okay. Deadly error number 1, overcorrecting.
Yeah. Now, there's 2 parts to that word.
Okay.
Over and correcting.
Okay.
So let's talk about this idea of correcting. I don't think it's the best word to use in the context of teaching writing to children.
Okay.
Number one, it implies wrongness,
Right.
right? Number two, it sounds as though there's one right answer or one right way.
Kind of like a
do
math
something.
problem.
Yeah.
Well, there would be a right answer for a math problem.
You know, in writing, there are things that people do which are not quite legal grammatically. And we could name half a dozen famous authors right off the top.
Right.
Only very stylish, very effective.
Mm-hmm.
There's other things that people do which are perfectly legal and just don't work at all. Sound horrible, in fact. So writing is not like math, where it's kind of black and white. You got the answer or you didn't. There's always, dozens or hundreds of ways to do it, some of which may be more stylish, more appealing, others less. But the word correcting just doesn't fit well in that context. And then, of course, correcting implies wrongness. And I don't know about you, but I don't actually enjoy the feeling of being wrong.
Yes.
Right? So if someone says, well, I need to correct you, okay, well, it's true. I may need correction. We all do from time to time.
Yes, we do.
But it takes an emotional drain, right? It takes a toll. So this is why I suggest that parents in particular change the word from correcting to editing.
Oh, editing. Okay.
Because let's face it, an editor is your friend. We have a couple very fine editors that work with us.
Yes.
And I love them.
Yes.
Their job is to help me avoid looking stupid in public.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And every writer has at least one editor. In fact, many times writers will thank the editor in the little acknowledgement section of a book. So an editor is kind of on your team. An editor's job is to help you be the best version of yourself, right? And so that kind of changes the context right there.
Right.
And I think especially when you have, a mom helping a child, in particular, a mom helping say a 12-year-old boy.
I was just thinking of my story with my son and how I got turned on to IEW is exactly that. He was 12 and we were fighting over writing. It's tough.
Yeah.
And he didn't know what I wanted, and I didn't know how to give him what I wanted. I didn't know how to teach him what I wanted. So enter IEW. But yeah, there were lots of arguments and me marking up his paper and saying this is wrong. And he would say, but I like it. So what do you do?
Well, boys around that age start to have a bit more will and inner strength and willingness to challenge. And making you happy is no longer the highest satisfaction in their life, And that's good. I mean, they all have to grow up.
Right.
But when you say, here, I'll serve you. I will make some good suggestions, right? That changes the context. The other thing would be the overcorrecting part of overcorrecting, and that would be marking too many things. When you think back to when you were in school, it could be high school, college, I don't know. We may have all had at least one teacher who would just, mark dozens and dozens of things and give little mini lectures in the margin. And I mean, how many of us, when we got that paper, thought, oh, teacher, thank you. Thank you for sparing so much of your valuable time to give me all this detailed feedback and advice. I'm going to pore over this and try to internalize all the wisdom so that I can do better next time.
Nope.
I don't think so.
Nope.
Most people, and certainly most people like me, would get the thing and just look at it and think, I'm wrong. That's bad. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what she wants. I don't understand. I can't make her happy. I am bad at this. I hate it. And that can very quickly roll, especially if there's, more than a few instances of this, into this real dislike and hatred of the thing.
Of the work that they did, but also might be projecting onto the teacher who gave them all those really helpful comments, well-meaning, but they may now start to resent the instructor.
Yeah. So I have come to believe that actually a minimalist approach is better when it comes to marking student papers. And I think this had its seed in one of Dr. Suzuki's most important teaching ideas.
Okay.
And that was the 1-point lesson.
Oh, okay.
So Suzuki would very often ignore all sorts of problems in a student's playing and just focus on one small aspect of that and then say, go do this and that and work on this one thing. And then next lesson, perhaps it would be a different aspect. But he would never overload a student with too many corrections or advices all at once. And that was deeply ingrained into me, not just from him, but from other masterful Suzuki method music teachers. And so I think I brought that to my teaching of other subjects.
Right.
And so let's point out a few things here which can be fixed easily. You could also design a little lesson around those things and not try to fix everything and make it perfect all at once.
Right. Even as you're talking about this, I'm thinking of remembering things, memorizing things. Like I think about the topic clincher rule, and maybe that's the thing that you're going to focus on for these next few weeks of lessons. How do they do it? Frequency, intensity, duration. How do kids actually internalize something that you're trying to teach them? If you have too many that you're working on all at once, you couldn't possibly know them well enough to be able to.
Well, and it's kind of like the easy plus one philosophy as well. Let's work on one thing until it appears to be smooth and easy, and then add in another complexity. So growing the checklist gradually.
Right.
And of course, anyone who's taught with the structure and style system for any length of time realizes that checklist is such a godsend when it comes to making grading, if necessary, objective.
Right.
So you did it or you didn't.
Right.
It's not, do I like it or not?
Right.
So that idea of being able to be very objective about grading and then taking a minimalist approach to editing. I also discovered that as I was teaching other people's children, and I'd get a little class of 10, 15 kids, the worst thing is having that little stack of 15 papers.
Right.
Even if they're just a couple paragraphs long, but whoa, if it's, a 5-7 paragraph length of essay or paper, it's just so depressing to have to sit there and mark all these papers and feel like you have to do, 20 or 30 minutes on each one, which is what it would take to do that, fix every single thing, give all the mini lectures in the margin, give all the helpful hints at the end, etc. So I also came across an interesting statistic. According to the National Council of Teachers of English, what is the number one reason students don't do more composition in school?
Because they're not very good at it?
No, because teachers don't like marking papers.
Okay, and I have to admit this, as I'm listening to this, and that I taught school for a couple of years, but the grade that I loved to teach was first and second grade. Those grades, because they're young and they love their teacher, and maybe it's because there's not a lot of grading, but I'm thinking of the teachers who are listening to this right now, that middle school teacher who's got 5 sections of English, and there's not 15 papers per class. There's 30 or more papers per class. Can you imagine having to grade 150 papers a week? That's a full-time job in and of itself.
It would kill you. Yeah. So you wouldn't want that many papers.
So overcorrecting is dangerous not only to the student but to the teacher.
The teacher. So one thing I kind of stumbled into, which has worked out fairly well, I think, in most cases, especially in the homeschool world. This would be harder in a school, but it could still be attempted, and that is the idea of asking the students to hire an editor.
Right.
Because, I don't want to have to slog through all of the dumb little things that slip in.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to focus on structure and style. And if it's there, great. If it's not there, note that, quickly, be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Give it back to the student. The grade is A or I, accepted, accomplished, or incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of, little spelling and punctuation and complete sentence stuff, most moms can do that.
Mm-hmm.
They can fix that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say to my students, first assignment of the year, go hire an editor.
Okay.
And I am not it unless you want to pay $100 an hour. You can hire, you can hire an older sibling.
Mm-hmm.
You could hire your grandma.
Mm-hmm.
You could hire a friend if they're smarter than you are. You could even hire your mom, but you do have to know the difference between a mom and an editor.
Okay.
Do you know the difference?
Well, you pay your mom. No, you don't pay your mom.
Well, you pay your editor. Well,
you pay your editor.
See, an editor will kind of fix up your paper and hand it back with no lecture attached.
Oh,
A
right.
mom, for some reason, wants to sit you down and go over it,
Mm-hmm.
which essentially means explain why she made every mark on every paper to each child. And I'm afraid that is probably one of the least effective things,
Right.
especially if you have a child who isn't prone to wanting all of that
Mm-hmm.
good, helpful advice.
Right. Right.
I actually noticed this years ago before I met you, and I just started IEW. I published my little newsletter and other things. I didn't have anybody to help me,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So my wife would proofread the stuff I wrote,
Mm-hmm.
and she's half decent at that.
Yeah.
And I remember giving her like an article that I was going to put in the newsletter, and she would mark it up. And then she would sit down and say, try to explain why she made every
Mhm,
mark she made.
mhm.
And I'm just sitting there thinking, I do not need this. Just give it to me, and I will look at your suggestions and decide if I agree or like them or
Right.
not.
Yeah.
And I thought at that moment, wow, if I feel this way
Mm-hmm.
with my wife, who I love so much,
Mm-hmm.
as a semi-mature adult, if I'm having this emotional feeling, think about a poor little boy and his mom.
Right.
And so I kind of encourage, parents. In fact, I even write a letter to the editor, and
Mm-hmm.
it goes something like this: "Congratulations on being hired as my student's editor.
Right.
Now, here's what I'd like you to do." And then
Mhm.
I explain, don't make it good,
Mm-hmm.
just make it legal. Don't give a whole lot of advice. Just technically get it to the point where the student can implement those changes. I can look at it, and we move forward.
Right. And let me just speak to that for a moment. We have extensive show notes with every podcast. And so I'm just going to say that, we have a great team that puts that together for us. And we'll put a link in the show notes to that letter to the editor, letter to my editor. So it's for the student to give to whomever is editing their paper. I had to
Yes.
correct myself right there, edited that. But I think the kids that are writing are just like you and me. They're writing fast. Their brain is moving faster than their hands, and so they're skipping words, or they're not realizing that was a sentence fragment. And so maybe they're not being careful, but I imagine it's that they don't know. It's not that they don't know how to do it. They know, they just went too fast, and the editor can help with them. But I also think about the student who's learning these new stylistic techniques, and they just sound goofy at the beginning. You've got an article called "It's So Awkward,"
Right.
and just talk about that, and we'll link to that one as well. And so speak to that for a moment, the value of just having them correct what's legal.
Yeah, just like I said, make it legal,
Mm-hmm.
not try to make it good. Then when I look at it, I can look at, oh, there's an awkward usage, or this style technique needs some more examples.
Mm-hmm.
We need to talk this through, and why does this work and that not work? In fact, one of the books that I sold once upon a time that had a very big influence on us here at IEW was this little book called Grammar with a Giggle,
Mm-hmm.
where the author suggested that you take your student papers. She was a school teacher. Take your student papers and extract from those student papers some of the grammatical errors or goofy usages that kids do, and write those into a story, changing the words to protect the innocent.
Right.
And then give that to the kids so they can practice editing or fixing those things which are the same things they're doing in their own writing, only they notice it more easily.
Right.
And, I love the idea of that book, and I did it myself pretty successfully. But what I found is most teachers and almost all homeschool moms just don't have the time to construct those things. And that was really the birth of our what is now hugely successful Fix-It grammar program.
Yeah, and that's great because there's those embedded errors, but first they teach, and then they practice, and then they practice again, so that they're really internalizing these grammar concepts.
Right, and it's, grammar, it's usage, it's punctuation, it's homonyms and spelling that are common errors. I've noticed with myself and with almost everyone, it's easier to find those things in someone else's writing.
Isn't that the truth? Yep.
When you write something and then you read what you wrote, it seems right. Well, it seemed right. That's why you wrote it in the first place.
Right.
And so you read it again, and it still seems okay. And so it's actually very hard to edit yourself. It seems to be much easier, especially for children, to find those things in something other than what they wrote. So having the contrived, embedded error editing program that the Fix-It is the best kind of practice, really, I think, to teach editing skills. And then what you see is, of course, it carries over.
Right.
Right. The kids, have to find the end of the sentence, put a period in the capital, and do that 100 times and fix it 1 and 2. And then they start to notice, oh, this is one of those spots where I should probably put a period in the capital,
Right.
And so there's a carryover that works very well, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to mention, in our Structure and Style for Students video courses, you don't necessarily create assignments for the students where you create a story based on their errors, but you bring out the errors that class made and write it on the board, and you ask the kids to fix it.
Right.
And you do that over and over again. And I think it's super helpful in learning maybe a new stylistic technique that you thought, or just a fun way to teach agreement, subject-verb agreement, that kind of thing.
Yeah, if one student does something that's a little goofy, it's a good chance that other students in that same group have or will do that similar thing.
Right.
So what I would do is, I'm just reading the paper looking to be sure, does it have all of the things on the checklist? And is there anything goofy that could become an object lesson? And then I would just copy that sentence onto a different piece of paper, and I might get half a dozen goofy things, and then I would choose a couple, throw it on the board, change a few words to protect whoever actually wrote it so they don't feel picked on. And then just have a little conversation, fix it together. And, it's just one more little bit of information that adds up to the total mass of information that students acquire about usage.
Great. So overcorrecting, the solution to the problem, the deadly error of overcorrecting, is to have a checklist so the teacher and the student know what they're going to be actually accountable for. Have the student hire an editor so anything goofy gets caught before the paper is turned in. Let me just ask you, let me insert a question there. What if it is a homeschool environment and there is only one person looking at that paper? So does the student then hire another editor outside of the mom who is the teacher?
Well, like I said, you can hire your mom, but the mom has to have the mentality. I'm being an editor.
Now I'm the editor.
My job, put on the hat, right? My job isn't to correct this child and point out every single thing that could have been better, but to minimally edit to make it legal, not good, hand it back with a smile, no lecture attached. Child rewrites, or, if they're working on a keyboard, They would put in those changes, produce the most perfected version of it that they can, score it A, 100%, or something's still missing, do it one more time, and then just be done with it.
Right.
And don't be too attached to the product because it's really all about the process.
Right.
And I think, moms can do that. It's just they have to practice a little bit.
Right.
I find it's always easier to be nicer to other people's children.
So there's a plug for co-op classes, maybe an online class with an IEW instructor.
Well, there's some things I think are taught well in a one-on-one or a student working individually with a tutor available. Math, I think, would fall in that category because everyone's kind of at a different place on the pathway, and there's not a lot of collaboration or imagination works its way into most math. I mean, there could be some. Spelling would be another thing. But writing, I really like being able to teach in small groups because as soon as you've got a few people contributing to the conversation, then it's a case where someone has an idea that someone else might not have had, but because it kind of gets stirred up, those ideas are now available to anyone who wants to use them.
Right.
And so it does promote kind of a freer environment.
Right.
It's like if you had to sit down and, figure out what to do all by yourself, you're not going to have nearly as many ideas as if you get your team and you ask a bunch of questions and you freely share.
Yes.
Even an idea that might seem crazy at the time.
Yep.
Then you can sort through and filter. We do this in business all the time.
Right. Yep.
We do it in research and higher education.
Right.
So the idea that a child, should be limited in their access and have to think of everything they ever write all by themselves.
Right.
It's not very realistic in the way the world operates.
Exactly.
So I think small groups are very convenient because you can kind of share ideas and vocabulary and maybe, it's a crazy idea and somebody says, hey, that's really funny, I'll try that. And, and so it's just you get a lot more. So I do encourage, parents to, at least if you've got, 2 or 3 kids the same, 2 or 3 years to, teach them in a group.
Yep.
Or get a video where you've got a bunch of kids who are sharing a bunch of ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one way. Or do the video or do a class with a manageable number. No one should teach 30 children writing all at once.
And every teacher who's listening to this says, yes, you're right.
But whatever your comfort level is, half a dozen maybe. I've always liked 12. I've always thought that's just I can keep an eye on everyone. I can remember all their names.
Right.
I can see them all at once.
Yeah.
I can get everybody involved in the conversation.
Yeah.
But once you get into the 20-something, it's much, much harder. And that is, of course, the challenge of full-time schools and teachers.
Right. I want to just ask you one more question as we're wrapping up this episode. You mentioned that teachers in schools don't assign writing assignments because they don't want to grade them. But yet we know that writing is a skill, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. So overcorrecting, is that something that we can help teachers with so that they're assigning more writing assignments?
Well, I think, as we've mentioned it, if you can't say to your students, please go have someone else edit this thing, possibly, in some cases, there's an aide that could maybe do some of that.
Yep.
In a smaller kind of school, probably a private school or charter school or something, you might be able to bring in kids from a higher grade.
Oh, right, yeah.
To help. I don't think peer editing generally works because if everybody's in 4th grade, half the kids maybe know more than the other half, but it's a random mix, and the person helping you may actually not know as much or be as facile. But if you can bring in a student who's a few years older, that's a possibility as well. And then worst case scenario, you just take the super minimalist approach.
Right.
And you just blaze through those papers. Keep the assignments shorter. Psychologically, a pile of 1 paragraphs is a lot easier to deal with
Right.
than a pile of 3 or 5 paragraphs.
Right.
3 is manageable. Once you get into 5, 6, or more, that just it takes so much time. But if you take the minimalist approach and just fix what needs to be fixed, don't do mini lectures, don't do explanations,
Right.
make notes for your teaching, it should help you be more efficient. And just remember, the most important thing is not the product of the paper that you want to send home or hang on the wall or put in a portfolio. That's an artifact.
Right.
The most important thing is the experience the students are having as they're in class, as they're working on their outlines, as they're working on their compositions. And, if you can also be available to them while they're writing, that's the advantage that a 5-day-a-week school teacher has, is you can do a little bit of in-class writing every day.
Yep.
A hybrid or a co-op, it's kind of like, okay, here's the whole plan, now go home and do it.
Right.
But if you can circle around the room and, be available to the kids as they have a question, they may have a question like, should there be a comma here? Or could you help me think of a better word?
Right.
Or I can't find a who-which clause for this. Can you help me? Then you can intercept some of those
Yes.
things that might need more after-the-fact
Right.
editing stuff. So
Right.
A little bit of writing in class every day, being constantly involved and available, that helps a lot too.
Awesome. Okay, Andrew. Well, we are out of time, so we'll wrap up 4 Deadly Error 1 today with a promise to get back to 4 Deadly Error number 2 next week. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, or just visit us each week at iew.com/podcast. Until then, on behalf of Andrew Pudawa and the team at IEW, I thank you for allowing us to partner with you on your journey toward better listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking.